Not that long ago, if you wanted to get high, you basically had two choices. You rolled it up or you packed a bowl. Either way, it smoked, it smelled, and everybody around you knew exactly what you were doing. Then, one little invention came along and flipped all of that on its head. Suddenly, you could get higher than ever, in seconds, from a device that fit in your pocket, made almost no smell, and looked like something you'd buy at a gas station. It completely changed how the world uses weed. But this same invention also caused one of the scariest health scares cannabis has ever seen. This is the story of THC carts. So before we get to the cart itself, you've got to understand where the idea of vaping weed even came from, because it's older than you'd think. Way back in the early 1990s, an American guy living in Amsterdam, known as Eagle Bill, started showing people how to heat weed instead of burning it, using a simple little glass pipe. People started calling him the father of vapor. Then around the year 2000, a German designer named Markus Storz built this big tabletop machine called the Volcano, which heated the weed and filled up a balloon bag you'd breathe from. It was a game changer, and it's still one of the most respected vaporizers ever made. But those were big and clunky. The thing that actually made the cart possible came from a totally different place, and it wasn't even about weed. Because in 2003, a pharmacist in China named Hon Lik invented the modern e-cigarette. His dad had died of lung cancer from smoking, and Hon Lik was a heavy smoker himself, so he built a little device that heated a liquid into a vapor to get nicotine without the smoke. He called it Ruyan, which means like smoke. It hit China in 2004 and spread across the world from there. And that little piece of technology, a battery heating a coil to turn liquid into vapor, is the exact blueprint that weed carts would later be built on. Now here's where it comes together, and I've got to be honest with you, because there's no single genius who invented the THC cart. Weed was still illegal basically everywhere, so nobody was documenting or patenting this stuff. What we do know is that around 2010, extractors out in Colorado and California started taking that cheap Chinese electronic cigarette hardware and, instead of nicotine juice, filling it with cannabis oil. The early attempts were rough. People were literally soaking cotton balls in hash oil. But then somebody had the idea to build the oil right into a little cartridge you could screw onto a battery, and that changed everything. One industry vet remembers a Denver dispensary showing him a box of these early cartridges in late 2010, calling it the moment that solved the whole messy cotton ball problem. But there's one tiny technical thing that made the entire industry possible, and you've probably never even thought about it. It's called the 510 thread. Basically, it's the little screw connection that attaches a cart to a battery named for its size. It originally came from the e-cigarette world, from a company called Joyatech. And here's the thing, they never patented it. So it became a free, universal standard that anybody could use. That's the whole reason you can take almost any cart and screw it onto almost any battery, and it just works. That one open little screw thread is what let 1,000 different companies all build carts that worked together. Now, not every brand went that route. The PAX era, for example, uses its own proprietary pod system that only works with PAX hardware. It's a sleek, locked-in ecosystem, and it's got a massive following. But the 510 stayed king because of that open, universal appeal. So the technology was there, and the first company to really turn it into a big national brand showed up in 2012. It was called Open Vape, out of Denver. It came from a husband and wife who ran a dispensary and started their own oil company, then teamed up with another couple to build a vape brand. And it took off like crazy. By 2015, Pen Vape was selling around 200,000 cartridges a month. And on the month of April, thanks to 420, they sold almost 500,000. At one point, they had something like 40% of the entire vape market. Around that same time, you got the G-Pen, made by a company called Grenco Science, started by a guy named Chris Volkerts, who literally sold them out of the trunk of his car. Now, real quick, a myth to clear up, because a lot of people think the first G-Pen was an oil cart. It wasn't. The original was actually for dry herb and wax. But the G-Pen became a massive cultural icon anyway, especially in hip-hop, and it did more than almost anything to make vaping weed look cool. Now let's break down how one of these carts actually works, because it's pretty simple. You've got 4 parts. There's the little tank that holds the oil, a heating coil inside called an atomizer, a mouthpiece on top, and the threaded bottom that screws onto the battery. When you hit it, the battery sends power to the coil. The coil heats the oil just enough to turn it into vapor, and you breathe it in. Nothing actually burns, which is why there's barely any smoke or smell. And if it's one of those all-in-one disposables, they just build the battery right in and you toss the whole thing when it's done. One of the biggest hardware upgrades that came along around 2016 was C-Cell's ceramic heating element. Before that, most coils were made of cotton or silica wicking, which could burn and give you that gross, charred taste. C-Cell's ceramic tech heated the oil more evenly, didn't burn out as fast, and handled thick oils way better. It basically became the industry standard almost overnight, and if you've used a halfway decent cart in the last few years, there's a good chance it had a C-Cell inside it. But the real story of the cart is the oil inside it, because that stuff evolved fast. The first carts were filled with carbon dioxide oil, made by blasting the weed with pressurized carbon dioxide, usually testing around 70 to 90% THC. Then came the big one, distillate. Distillate is when you refine that oil down over and over until it is this nearly pure, clear, almost flavorless THC, often testing over 90%. People literally called it the clear. It was cheap, super strong, and consistent, so it took over the whole industry. The only downside was it had no flavor and none of those natural plant compounds left in it, so companies started adding terpenes back in to give it taste. Specific ones like myrcene for that earthy, musky note, limonene for citrus, and pinene for that sharp pine smell. But here's the thing about distillate that the live resin crowd will tell you. Stripping everything out also strips away what's called the entourage effect. That's the idea that THC, CBD, terpenes, and all the other cannabinoids work better together as a full package than THC just flying solo. It is why a lot of people say a live resin cart just hits differently than a distillate one, even at a lower THC percentage. After that came live resin, which is made from fresh frozen weed to keep all the natural flavor, smell, and that full spectrum of compounds, and then the top shelf stuff, live rosin, which is made with just ice, water, heat, and pressure using a rosin press, no chemicals at all. That's the connoisseur's choice today. Now there is one more thing about that oil you need to know, because it ends up mattering more than anything else in this whole story. Pure THC oil is really thick and gooey, so it does not always heat right in a cart. To fix that, companies started adding thinning agents to smooth it out, things like propylene glycol, vegetable glycerin, and other oils. In the legal world, this was mostly done carefully and safely. But out on the black market, sellers realized they could use these same thinners to pull off something sneaky. They could stretch out a little bit of weak oil and make it look like a full, thick, premium cart. And that one shortcut is what ended up putting people in the hospital. So through the 2010s, Carts absolutely exploded, and it's easy to see why. They were discreet, they didn't stink, they were super easy to just grab and puff, no grinding or rolling, and they were strong. One California delivery service saw its concentrate sales jump 400% in a single year. A whole wave of brands defined the era, like Stiiizy, which launched in 2017 with its own sleek pod system and sold over 1 million pods in its first year, plus names like Select, Raw Garden, Rove, Brass Knuckles, and Heavy Hitters. And just like with strains, hip-hop ran with it. Rappers had their own vape brands, Snoop and Wiz with the G-Pen, ASAP Rocky with his own line, and carts showed up in music videos everywhere. The concentrate world even got its own holiday, 710, which is oil spelled upside down, celebrated every July 10th. As of today, vaping is the second biggest category in all of legal weed, and in the biggest markets like California and Washington, carts have actually passed flower, especially with the younger crowd. In California, Gen Z now spends almost half their weed money on vapes. But that explosion had a dark side, and it comes down to how easy these things are to fake. See, all those empty cartridges and all that fancy packaging, it's mass-produced in China and sold in bulk online on sites like Alibaba and DHgate for pocket change. Anybody can buy empty carts and empty boxes, fill them with whatever, and sell them as a real brand. And the most infamous example of this is a name you've probably heard, Dank Vapes. Here's the crazy part. Dank Vapes was never actually a real company. It was just empty packaging, boxes anybody could order online that black market sellers stuffed with their own mystery oil. The CDC literally said it was not a real company, just the most popular of a whole class of fake brands. There were others too, stuff like Mario Karts and Chronic Carts, all just empty boxes waiting to be filled. And on top of the fake brands, counterfeiters also ripped off the real legal brands, faking Heavy Hitters and Brass Knuckles right down to copying their little authentication stickers. So people out there thinking they were buying a trusted brand had absolutely no idea what was really in their cart. And in 2019, all of that came crashing down into a genuine tragedy. All across the country, people who vaped, a lot of them young and healthy, suddenly started showing up in hospitals with severe, terrifying lung damage. Doctors were baffled. The CDC jumped in and gave it a name, EVALI, which stands for e-cigarette or vaping product use associated lung injury. And the numbers were scary. By early 2020, there were over 2,800 people hospitalized and 68 confirmed deaths. The average patient was just 24 years old. So what was actually killing people? Well, the CDC investigated hard, and they traced it to one main culprit, a thinning agent called vitamin E acetate. Now here's the messed up part. Vitamin E acetate is totally safe when you swallow it in a supplement or rub it on your skin. But when you heat it up and breathe it into your lungs, it can cause devastating damage. And this was that exact black market shortcut in action. Sellers were dumping this stuff into their carts to stretch weak oil and make it look thick and premium. And some of the illicit carts they tested were made up of 30 to 50% of it. When doctors checked the lungs of the sick patients, they found vitamin E acetate in 48 out of 51 of them, and in none of the healthy people they compared against. But here is the single most important fact in this entire story, so listen closely. This was overwhelmingly a black market problem, not a legal weed problem. Over 80% of the people who got sick had used illicit THC carts, with Dank Vapes being the most common brand of all. And in California, health officials confirmed that not a single illness or death was linked to weed bought from a legal, tested store. It all came from the street stuff. The problem was never the technology itself. It was the untested, faked-up garbage being sold in the shadows. Sadly, because the early panic just said vaping, a lot of people blamed all vaping, even nicotine, and states started banning things left and right. But the real villain was that cheap cutting agent in illegal carts. So how did carts survive something like that? Well, the industry actually learned from it. Legal states cracked down hard, and in California, the Bureau of Cannabis Control tightened up the compliance requirements significantly, requiring rigorous lab testing for potency, pesticides, heavy metals, and those exact cutting agents, and putting QR codes on packaging so you can check the results yourself. That kind of state-level testing and licensing framework is a big part of why the legal market came out the other side with more trust than before. The whole market started shifting away from mystery distillate toward that flavorful live resin and clean, solventless live rosin. Those all-in-one disposables blew up because they're so easy. And the hardware kept getting better, with those ceramic CCL heating elements and USB-C charging becoming the new normal. But I've got to keep it real with you. Even legal weed isn't perfect. California still issues recalls sometimes, usually for pesticides slipping through. And the counterfeit problem never fully went away. That empty packaging is still for sale online right now. So the #1 lesson from this whole story still stands. With a street cart, you genuinely have no idea what's inside it. So at the end of the day, the THC cart really did change cannabis forever. It took weed out of the smoky back room and turned it into something clean, silent, and pocket-sized. So convenient, it now outsells actual flower in the biggest markets on Earth. It was cobbled together out of a Chinese e-cigarette, some hash oil, and one little screw thread nobody ever patented, with no single inventor to even thank for it. But it also came with a hard lesson written in that vitamin E scare that when there's no rules and no testing, cheap and fake can turn deadly. The cart is here to stay, and it changed the game completely. You've just got to respect what's actually in it.